Okay.
We've got a couple minutes, but we are streaming, so I just wanted to make sure we were going.
Oh, yeah, so I got 3 more minutes.
Yep.
When I heard you saying, we're just waiting for Nancy and Melody, as I walked in, I said, Melody's on her way, she's right behind me.
I did hear a comment, I was just...
The questions we sent to Glenn for the next LPC meeting, is he answering those at the meeting? Is that what's happening, or what's going on?
So all questions that got submitted, I tried to answer if I could. I know Bob had some questions, but I just don't have answers for those because that's just not something we have. But if they were specifically for Glenn, I'm gonna guess he'll answer them on Wednesday.
I think I said it to you and Glenn.
Okay. Yeah, if there was one of legal nature, he will definitely address that if I didn't.
I mean, one was whether the, when you have 2 corner lots, if there is an EBL.
Yeah, the answer was no.
Okay. And did those answers get sent out, or we'll hear them at the...
Yeah, they were part of the packet that I sent out on Friday afternoon.
Okay, I thought I went through the packet.
So if you click on the agenda, the report should come up.
Yeah.
And the report was multiple pages because I went through
It's like a
all the-
gazillion pages, it's like 100 and...
Yeah, well, because again, I just put all of the public record back in,
okay.
but the action item report should contain all the responses to those.
Okay.
Also, Vandy?
There's a mention of that in the questions section, but it's like one line. It's no, there isn't.
Yeah, I just put like, no, the answer is no.
How should we interpret this, Joe?
I think that was Tom from last time. Tom was like, where's all the candy?
But no one's sitting over there.
Oh, is that chair?
There's no, but Melanie's the chair. You need to go over there, Melanie.
All right, who wants the Snickers? Who wants the
I'm going in for a Snickers. I don't know about you guys.
I think there was some M&Ms.
Oh, I'm a fun-sized Snickers person. Do you want the M&Ms in there?
No, thank you. Maybe the Twix later. Can't go wrong with caramel.
Well, there's caramel and Snickers too,
There
you know.
is.
Like, you gotta...
The peanut butter Snickers are good too.
Yeah. Actually, I love my Snickers frozen.
I was gonna say best cold, like the peanut butter
Yeah.
M&Ms are best cold.
Yes, I agree.
Candy fantasies.
Peanut butter M&Ms and a can of Coca-Cola got me through college. For Snickers.
Slows down your consumption considerably.
I could make it last.
I got through grad school on popcorn.
Peanut butter M&Ms and Coca-Cola.
Ooh, was.
I don't know, I got through occupational therapy school on eggplant. In my little corner store that sold the eggplants, I was going over and buying them so frequently, she asked me what I was doing with them, okay? She thought I was making some floral arrangement with them or something. No, I'm eating them. Yeah.
Well, it is 1 o'clock, so you're more than welcome to get started, Melanie.
Okay, so this is a meeting of the Annexation Subcommittee. We are welcoming Bob Heffernan joining us, and hopefully we can, or he is coming up to speed on what we're attempting to do here. And we sent him along some of our thoughts on traditional neighborhood design and on improvements to the open space provisions. And I hope you've had time to review those. Bob? Excuse me?
I think you're muted, Bob.
Didn't mean to be, sorry. I have looked at everything I could of what you've done recently and read everything I could, including, you referred to some EPA government sites and documents, and read those. And I guess my first question would be, how far along are you, or do you have a target date to get this to the Planning Commission and that sort of thing? I mean,
Well, I think we have some things that we're still pursuing, so I think it's probably going to be in maybe 2 or 3 months before we get to present anything to the Planning Commission. And just to bring up some of those items, we may want to discuss process. In other words, how an annex or a proposal for annexation proceeds through review. I think we need to talk more about incentives for properties to annex. Well, the only thing that I think we've discussed in the past is possibly expediting reviews for annexed properties. I think open space ownership may still be an issue. And we haven't talked at all about, for example, a lot of the properties that we anticipate to come into annexation would be along New Road. And it's a scenic byway, and how do we preserve the scenic views along New Road, for example? And then I'm adding also possibly incentive to saving trees on a property, that we somehow make that an important prospect. And then one of the things that we had also talked about was getting some developer participation and feedback on what we're going to propose. So I think that would be very important to do sooner rather than later. So, Janelle, I don't know if you have ideas for developers to invite.
So I've actually had, because of the work the subdivision code is also doing, I've been letting developers know that this subcommittee has also been working. And I've told them, like, hey, go back, watch everything, send your feedback, and I just haven't received anything yet.
Okay.
But I do try to make sure I'm reaching out and letting them know, hey, we're looking at a number of things. I actually have a suggestion, because Bob's coming on and Melanie, you've taken over, and just some conversations I've heard from council is maybe putting a scope together of the things you wanted to look at, taking that and running it by council to make sure everybody's still on the same page. Because I know, like for the process for annexation, unfortunately, that is just completely up to council. It's how the charter works. And see, before you spend a lot of work into incentives and the TND and the other stuff, making sure that it's something that you're getting good feedback from council on, so you know what direction to move forward in.
Oh, do you think that should come before our presentation to the Planning Commission?
I think probably, because I think right now you've got a number of items that you're thinking you want to, delve deep into. And I think right now, maybe it's a good idea to just go to council and go, okay, this is what we've been looking at, and making sure everybody's still on the same page. Because I want to make sure that you guys have done a lot of great work, and that you can, it's meeting the expectations that everybody has.
Okay, well, let's get on the agenda then.
November then?
November?
Yep.
That seems like a long way off. Oh, I guess that isn't a long.
Next one, unfortunately.
Meeting, yeah. I mean, it's not,
Holy cow.
yeah.
Wait, where my mind is.
Wait, when did it become the middle of October? I'm like, oh my gosh, Halloween is right around the corner. Hence, Joe's brought chocolate. So yeah, it would be November 8th. I can make sure we get on the agenda. If you'd like to kind of give the presentation, and if there's something I can help with for I'm happy to help.
Right, okay. All right, great.
Because when you went through your list, the only other thing I thought of, which, hearing your comments, Janelle, maybe is outside the scope of what we'd be looking at, is I know there always seems to be a bit of a debate about annexation in terms of what it's costing the city not to annex and what it's costing the city when you do annex. And it seemed to me in those debates, even though I believe in the code there's some mention of looking at that, there really doesn't seem, at least my impression has been, there isn't clarity around what data is actually being pulled to look at that.
So that is beyond our scope, because we're to look at the subdivision, or the annexation codes. But I do know when an annexation request is submitted, council breaks down into different groups, and they're looking at the zoning, they're looking at utilities, they're looking at the financial costs. So they do review all of that, and then make a final report back to council as whether or not to move forward with the annexation. The exact details of, I've only been here for one annexation, so the exact details of everything, I do know that they're looking at the finances to see, what would the taxes be, what would any hookup to utility costs be, building permits, business licenses. So they look at like the future costs of that coming in.
That's all the input. How about the costs to the city?
So the cost to the city would be administration, to add it to the tax rolls. So they're looking at all of those different things, and that all goes typically through Ellen Lorraine, because she's the finance head. So she'll work with council on that. It depends on who gets appointed to look at the finances from council for an annexation. So they look at all of that.
It just seemed to me, it's and this is something, maybe I would have to make my comments to council, but it seems that this is a repeating activity, and that one typically in that situation would develop a model that identified all the factors you'd be pulling, where you'd pull the data from. And so it isn't just up to whoever on council gets and delegated that task. You have something that you're actually...
Yeah, they may actually have that. That's just not something that comes through the planning office, because that's not something, typically when I get questions about an annexation, it's about land use and zoning. I'm not looking at that, because again, the process of an annexation is through the charter, and that's all up to how mayor council wants to run that one.
Right.
Yeah.
I need you at the mic, please.
I can get the mic, step up, and identify myself.
Joe Hockner, 305 Seagull Drive. The other thing to look at is nonprofits. It's like the high school was mentioned as being an annexation target years ago, but there's no taxes involved with that extensive property. The other piece of nonprofit is the University of Delaware dormitories along Sussex Drive. We annexed Highland Acres a couple of years ago, and the dormitories are south of that. And that's a target for annexation, but it's a nonprofit. So.
Yeah, and there's a number of enclaves throughout the city, but it's I don't think the city forcibly annexes.
I know, but we probably provide utilities to there and police and fire protection, so in case they should be paying pilot payments in lieu of taxes, but there's no taxes involved with nonprofits.
And again, that's all subject to mayor and council. We can definitely look at incentives, the open space ownership. I do know the byways, you mentioned that. We do work with the byways. I just got an email today that the next meeting's coming up. So I need to make sure it's on my agenda, my calendar, and I keep them informed of everything. So we work together. Typically when an application comes through for scenic byways, the enforcement authority for the byways, that falls through DelDOT because of it being federally mandated as a byway through DelDOT. But we do work with the historic Lewis byways. to let them know of projects coming up. So, and I know they worked with Lewis Waterfront Preserve. They've actually worked with the Lewis Brewing Company, and they've reached out to the Fancy Pants application because they're all on different byways. So we do definitely try to do that. But if you've got other ideas, we can do that. The tree protection, maybe that's something we look at the subdivision code, or maybe a holistic zoning code if we wanted to look at that holistic citywide, or if you just wanted to focus on the cluster. So lots of different options for that.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to look at that citywide, but maybe it's just something that's forwarded to the subdivision committee?
That's up to you guys. I know subdivision is looking at new landscaping requirements, but that would only be for major subdivisions. So something I think we can definitely talk about, and to see where you guys wanted to move forward with that.
I wonder if in reporting back to LPC this week, when you and I each report back from our respective subcommittees, we might not want to highlight that there seem to be some issues that keep coming up that really are broader than annexation and, in a sense, broader than subdivision. And that we probably should, as an LPC, start looking at these and making a list of them and beginning to decide what's the
I
best
think
way to
that's
address
a
it.
really good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got our action plan, but there's always things that just pop up.
Yeah.
So, and I know, like, I'm working with Robin on some code changes just we need to take a look at. So I always have a handy-dandy list of potential code changes. So if you guys start making your lists, and then we can just have one big list, and again, it'll grow and shrink as we take things off and we can get things amended.
Okay. All right, so I guess one of the items that I wrote down here is we had, Jeanette, Jill, we had emailed to you
Yes.
our thoughts on TND and open space, and wondered if you had a chance to look at them in terms of how they could be incorporated into the regs.
So definitely the open space, I think, again, that's actually gonna fold over into the subdivision, because I think we've already kind of started using that in the subdivision regs. So we've taken the information and kind of snuck it over to subdivision code to a degree. Just like the main big
subdivision
picture.
code originally said this committee was looking at open
Yes.
space. But because we were moving along a bit more quickly, Janelle, based on the input that I provided, did a draft. And we did review it at the last meeting. And maybe, I think it would be helpful for this committee now to look at that draft.
Yes.
And provide comments that can be taken back to the subdivision committee, because, in the end, hopefully we should come up with something that both subcommittees
Yes.
would stand behind.
Yes.
Because in the end, it's going to be the LPC that needs to stand behind it.
Okay, I can get that and forward it to everybody.
Okay.
Now, but what you'll be forwarding, in our meeting, we made some suggested changes to it.
Yes.
Will you be forwarding the new version or the old version?
I don't have the new version yet,
So,
it'll be the old version with understanding that changes are coming.
Okay.
Because everything's in flux. We got a lot of different things in flux, but the main concepts are there for the open space and the pocket parks and the continuity and a lot of that was included into the subdivision open space.
Okay.
Because I think it makes sense is if we're going to have one open space, it gets used everywhere. So.
Okay.
and would it be helpful for me to highlight the changes that we suggested be made, so that when you and Bob see this,
Sure.
you have those in mind? Is that?
Well, perfect. I know there was discussion about like the overall open space, I think going to 20%. But again, cluster has a much higher number depending on the type. But like the definitions were definitely being updated to reflect what had been discussed here.
I think there were kind of three key changes. One was that for subdivisions, the open space shall not comprise less than, originally as drafted, it said 10%, and we upped that to 20%. The second was that no more than 20% can be impermeable, and that's 20% of the 20%, okay? And then the third was that there was a discussion around density and how wetlands, whether wetlands should be included in open space or excluded. And addressing that, we decided that we would, on a draft basis, address that through a change in terms of the density calculation excluding wetlands. But we still would allow, let me see what percentage we had, of at least 60% will be usable open space outside of wetlands, which means you can have at most 40% of the 20% wetlands.
Okay.
But one of the I think factors that influenced people on this was the concern that if you simply exclude wetlands completely from open space, you may, in a sense, inadvertently be pushing people to build right up as close as they can to the wetlands and not looking at how you can have open space that's contiguous and, would, in a sense, we believe, make a more pleasant environment. So.
Yeah, and we also were trying to avoid the conflict with the recently adopted wetlands buffer ordinance, which says it has to be in the open space. So a lot of good discussion about how to protect the wetlands and identify open space. So
are stormwater ponds and so on in that open space or not?
Yes, they are.
Okay, and there have been some discussion in this committee to exclude them.
No, they're not in the open space in this draft. It says no structures, specific uses that cannot count towards open space include, but are not limited to, stormwater management basins, spillways, level spreaders, bioretention areas, and water retention ponds.
Okay, I read that backwards, so I'm gonna have to, because they typically are counted as open space. They're just not typically the usable open space. So I think I need to go back and triple check that one.
I think as our committee, when we reviewed this,
Yeah, I must have,
that's what it was, the way it was being read, so.
Okay, that's what you had in this committee last time, and it's a big difference from what I think has been considered in some other places.
yeah, that's unlike any place I've ever worked in many different places, but again.
It's interesting, it certainly is a change from what we currently have. When I looked at the code for other jurisdictions, not necessarily local jurisdictions, I was looking at the EPA site and national sites. There were many that excluded it. So, but this clearly should be a point that we should discuss because I think it is a very significant change.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm concerned if there may have been any confusion on our committee about, I read the words and took them for.
It was probably on me on Friday it was just an off Friday morning. But I could see pushback coming again for incentive-wise for, if you just told me I can't count my open space, my stormwater management in my open space, what are you going to give me to annex because I can clearly count it in the county?
Well, the problem is that we've had several reviews recently where there's virtually no open space that wasn't stormwater management, other than the setbacks around the periphery, and that's not really usable open space. And so, perhaps it's got to be a percentage rather than all of it, but.
Well, I think because we are saying that at least 60% will be usable open space, unless you're going to permit boating in these basins, I mean,
Somebody's tried once,
It
but
is, I think we then need to clarify whether a stormwater management basin is usable.
agreed.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, towards recreation areas and
Towards
open
yeah.
space, yes. Because it might be like, because I've worked in a place where the open space, the stormwater ponds counted as part of the open space, but not towards like an active recreation area. But like the walking path around it definitely counted, but not the pond itself. And that's where actually somebody was like, it was large enough, we want to put a boat and have a dock in there so people could fish. And I'm like, that did not get approved. But yeah,
I worked on a school project once in Baltimore where we designed a stormwater management facility, and the school was really interested. So they said, well, we want to teach our students about this. And so we actually designed a deck that extended out over and down to the water level of the pond so that they could actually go there and do science experiments, and see what plants were growing and whatnot and what animals came. So they really turned it into a feature rather than just, something alongside that no one really wants to be near. So,
And this draft is written, it says, for projects that provide more than 30% of the gross area for open space and would utilize green technology stormwater best management practices that can be graded into natural terrain, permitting recreational use during a majority of weather conditions. So when you're thinking about different, storm water management approaches, there are those that, when you're not having a major storm, it might be considered usable, I would think. The Planning Commission may recommend relief from this provision, which may be granted at the discretion of City Council. So there is, I think, one of the things you outlined at the beginning of this subcommittee, Melanie, was, walking this balance between encouraging people to be creative and yet trying to set standards. And I think some things like that are in here to still provide that pressure valve for creativity that would be.
yeah. The new stormwater management up at Mariner's Retreat, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see it, but there's, it's very naturally sculpted into the land, and it's all been planted with wetland sedges and plants. And there is a pathway that goes along it, and it's lovely. I mean, it's going to be lovely for the residents there, and it's lovely for the rest of us in the neighborhood. So if we could have more facilities like that really became a bonus.
Yeah.
Because there's wildlife in there now too.
I think it's how do we incentivize that? How do we get people, because unfortunately not every site is suited for that. And it's, sometimes that costs more money, and it's like, well, how do we get them to get there? And that's always the challenge.
Well, I don't know how you get there, but the places where stormwater management becomes all of the open space really doesn't do anything for the community because it's just to look at. It's in some ways dangerous. A deep, steep-sided pond. And so when those need to be present, you certainly need to create some need for some other usable space that people can enjoy.
Now, we are saying in this draft that 60% of it has to be usable space outside of wetlands. But I think it comes back to making sure we're clear on whether
qualifies.
we're considering, I mean, right now, it excludes parking areas, sewage or water treatment facilities, and stormwater management basins.
That may be too restrictive.
To me, the stormwater management basins would be more, not the pond itself, it would be more the facilities in the road. But I'll double check with Tom on that one to make sure we're on the same page. Because I could see some pushback coming on that one from others. But again, this is the draft we're talking about, so everything is open.
But I think already this has been a useful discussion in terms of the other subcommittee, because, you know, we're seeing different interpretations of what's down here, or understandings of what was written. So.
Sorry, Friday morning was a little off for
okay.
me. Okay, so it's about 1:30. I think you definitely want to, we'll get on for a scope onto mayor and council's agenda, making sure we're staying on top of, like, this is what we're looking for, getting feedback to make sure everybody's moving in the correct path, or the same path.
Do we have a statement of scope that you would take to them? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of wrote down the TND, that you were looking to go the TND route for the cluster subdivision, working on the open space, and that's actually kind of in coordination with the subdivision code. You're looking at incentives, for encouraging annexation and while getting, the more traditional neighborhood design. The concerns about the scenic byway preservation, and then the tree protection, because I think the open space ownership, I think that kind of will work itself out. Typically, open space is going to be owned by the homeowners association, unless we have an option if they want to donate it to the city, and the city then would take it over as a park.
Well, that's where it's kind of interesting, because I think there's probably this trail through Mariner's Retreat is probably on private land, on homeowners association land. And yet the whole neighborhood is using it, both sides. I mean, bikers, walkers, moms
Yes.
with their prams, so everybody's using it, but it may well be on private ground. And that kind of facility really should be public.
Yeah, so that one was actually a condition of approval that the developer said they would provide a walking path from Henlopen Acres to Mariner's Retreat. So that was a code requirement.
But there's also a trail from the end of Seagull over to Verdon. So I don't know if that one is public.
That I don't, well, and again, even the one between Henlopen and Acres and Mariners is privately owned and maintained. Highland Acres, I'm sorry, Highland Acres.
I was confused for a second.
Sorry, Highland Acres. That is actually on open space land that is, I believe, because I just looked at that a couple months ago. It's just this thin piece of land between a couple of houses, because they didn't want it's maybe 5 feet wide, but the intent was that it wasn't, it was for a walking path. So I think that's something that, we can definitely encourage and consider as we move forward. How do we get more of that? Because I know there's been a lot of talk about interconnectivity of trails and other things.
Right.
And then at what point do we want to consider, does it become a city park? Does it become city maintenance? Does the city want to take it over?
Right.
The liability issues, lots of stuff.
Was the condition that they build the path, or was it that they build the path and make it open to the public?
It was supposed to be I know it was just supposed to be, they were supposed to provide a walking path.
Okay.
Which, again, was going to connect Highland Acres to Mariners Retreat.
Right.
So it was going to be for everybody, and it was going to be at the expense of the developer, if I'm recalling correctly.
But who's going to maintain it now?
The developer or the homeowners association? Because I can't remember, because it was like, did that one get, because that may not have been turned over yet. So again, so in a standard subdivision, if I'm putting in a walking path around a stormwater management pond, or I'm putting up a pool house or a multi-purpose court, that maintenance and responsibility falls on the homeowners association because it's their facilities. The commission and council just approved a subdivision that said the amenities are just for the members of that public and their guests, members of that community and their guests. So, I wouldn't be able to go over there because I'm not a member of that community and I wouldn't be a guest. So it's finding that balance.
I think our primary concern is interconnecting pathways,
Yeah, exactly.
that kind of thing. So, okay, so maybe that is a subset of the open space, is that we may want to encourage public ownership of certain open space areas.
And we can definitely, as applications come through, one of the first stops is the Parks and Recreation Commission. So they have the first take at that to get their feedback.
And Joe, you sit on that committee, don't you?
Parks and Rec, no.
Oh, okay,
He's on H Park.
okay.
We don't have a liaison for Parks and Rec. We only have one liaison, and Joe is for H Park.
Huh, okay.
Something else to raise at our meeting.
They do meet tonight, if you're interested, and I will be going in November. Parks and Rec are meeting tonight.
Okay, so the scenic issues then are still something that we may or may not need to address. But I think, considering how New Road is developing, the sooner the better on that.
Yeah.
And the good thing is there is an adopted corridor management plan for New Road that the city, the county, and DelDOT and the public worked, and of course the byway worked on to get approved. So as projects come through, DelDOT will hold them to those standards for the look and the feel of New Road. And I think as we went through, not all of New Road is going to look the same because it doesn't currently. Because again, when you get down towards Pilot Town, like the houses are right there, and as you get farther back, there's a little bit more open space. But they were taking all of that context-sensitive aesthetic into consideration as projects come through.
Well, they sure seem to tear down every hedgerow they can as the developers come through. So I'm not sure that I see any impact of scenic byway ordinance or whatever it is. I mean, it doesn't have the power of an ordinance, does it?
It does not.
No.
It does not, because it is not an ordinance. The enforcement power actually comes through DelDOT. And I know with some of the projects on New Road, agreements for landscaping were made between the developer and the byway. So there will be landscaping installed.
Not the same as a good old hedgerow.
Understood. I completely understand. I like my good old, sturdy trees. But, sometimes we do what we can, so.
I realize this is slightly off topic, but a question I had is, the 3/4 acre lots there that face right on, will the driveways for those homes go directly onto New Road?
Most likely, yes.
That's what it looked like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, with any luck, they'll have a shared driveway. So it won't be like 10 straight, it will be 5, and they would be shared. Typically, that's what DELDOT would have required, so you don't get the 10 individual.
Those will have to go over the storm,
They'll pipe it, they'll pipe the swale, and then they'll put like, sometimes you'll see the swale, and then you'll see like a little bridge, and they'll pipe underneath so they can get the driveway over. That's typically what you see, but again, that's gonna be up to DELDOT because it's gonna be theirs.
My comments to DELDOT.
I just need you at the mic, please. Gonna get your steps in.
My comments to DELDOT were to provide a backdoor access road to them, which would connect to the access road to the major development, and that all of the houses, the 10 houses up front, would be backloaded with an access road driveway behind it, so nobody would get right on
Yeah.
the new road. We'll see what happens.
Okay, so then the only other remaining issue is tree preservation. And I don't know if that's a completely new topic that we want to deal with.
I think there are two aspects to that topic. One is preserving trees of a certain level of maturity or importance, And then the other is, in some jurisdictions, there are requirements in terms of, how many trees you can just clear cut.
So, and I think that one might actually be one of the broader questions for the planning commission, because I've worked in jurisdictions where they say, okay, you've got woodlands, you can clear up to a certain percent. If you want to clear more than that, you're planting back more trees than you're taking out. So there's things to do that way. I'm not sure if we just want to focus that on the annexation zones, or if we want to look at that holistically citywide.
That's a good point.
Let me say that I would imagine that all of Lewis needs something along those lines, and it might be important in new development or annexation, but all of Lewis, doesn't really do much in that area. And I've lived in jurisdictions where to cut down a 3-inch tree, you needed to promise to replace it and approval. And in one famous case, a well-connected country club paid a $100,000 fine for taking down some trees along their driveway. They thought they were well-connected, I guess, but there was a procedure, a tree commission that you applied for, and people went out and looked at your trees and basically limited how much you could cut down and so on. But that would help all of Lewis if you did it with some limits on what you could do, what a developer can do on the front end, so you didn't start with everything denuded.
Right.
And I've also worked in places where they had a woodland protection and then they had street trees and you still had to plant trees on your property. So it was like one tree for every 3,000 square feet of lot area. So, you'd have, for a 5,000 square foot lot, you're planting 2 trees, and I can tell you, I would get out to do my inspection, they go, Janelle, it's coming today. Because they knew they weren't getting that CO until the tree was planted. So that's also an option. You guys can definitely consider as part of the subdivision regulations, as if you wanted to do something just in the cluster subdivision or holistically citywide. I think we've got a lot of options to look at landscaping and tree planting requirements and woodland protection. I think the woodland protection might fall holistically citywide. And then I think landscaping, Because we already have the street trees. If we wanted to go above and beyond, we can look at subdivision code, and then if we want to do something more in the cluster subdivisions, we could look at that. And I think in the cluster subdivision, it's like, okay, if we're going to make them plant more trees, again, what's that offset for encouraging them to come into the city?
Well, our immediate neighbor to the south, Rehoboth, has some sort of tree ordinance because
We read about it in the
we got it
paper all the time.
Exactly.
Don't take down trees.
So we should probably look into that. And I know that there are, well, I practiced in Maryland quite a bit, and Maryland had forest conservation ordinance that was statewide, which looked at, again, very similar to what you described. You looked at existing forests, and you were encouraged not to touch it, but you could take down a certain percentage, but then you had to replant. And you either replanted on site, or you found a nearby park or whatever that was willing to take additional trees within the watershed. So it was really a watershed issue as well as being tree conservation. And that seemed to work fairly well. That was accepted by the developers pretty quickly as just another hoop to jump through. So that's sort of two scales. One scale, Rehoboth is looking at individual trees, and this was looking at forests. So there are different ways of approaching it. But I think we need to put something on the agenda to think about that and talk about what would most suit Lewis. But in terms of the annexation, I think it's almost more important on the annexation parcels, because I think most other places in the city probably have very limited existing forests. So things that are about to be annexed might be more liable to have significant forests. Yep.
I mean, I suspect we're looking at two very different things in terms of anything around tree protection for annexation or new subdivisions versus tree protection for existing trees in the city, just in terms of, homeowners' rights. And also, I have lived in jurisdictions where if a tree is diseased and dead and it needs to come down, I lived somewhere where there was a big uproar because the delays for the city to approve the removal of that tree. In the meantime, it fell and destroyed some property. And the homeowner had been in the process of trying to take it down, but didn't,
Couldn't get it done fast enough.
couldn't get it done fast enough because of the delays in getting the approval and concerns about, what kind of tree they'd be replacing it with, et cetera. So
And Janet, who is our Parks and Marina Administrator, she works with Parks and Rec. So, like, the street trees, she's out there working with them to make sure they're staying trimmed for all the city trees. We do get calls of, like, can the city take this tree down? Well, it's actually yours. So I think it also depends on how detailed do we want to go into tree preservation. Because I'm going to tell you, I actually had last year 2 trees fall in my yard. Both of mine. And thankfully nobody was like, oh, you can't take that down. Well, it fell. So and unfortunately they were beautiful trees, big, beautiful trees. But, it's finding that, again, broken record, balance of how much detail do we want to put in it, how much protection do we want, and where does that work. But it sounds like we definitely, on our list to council, want to, recommend that we're looking at tree protection, especially for the annexation areas. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. All right, well, I think that was my agenda. Do you have anything further, Nancy?
Yeah.
Okay, Bob, do you have anything further?
No, I'm good. happy to be here.
Okay.
Awesome.
We're happy to have you.
So do you want to put like a scope together for council? And then I can put it into the report process, and then we can get it onto their agenda for the 8th. Do you want to meet before or after you get feedback from mayor and council?
I think probably after.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they meet the 8th. Do you guys want to meet that week, that 9th or that 10th? Or do you want to meet the week after, which is the 15th?
When is the LPC meeting in November?
The 17th.
17th.
So council meets the 8th, so you could get council feedback on the 8th. You could probably make some discussions that week and then report back to commission the next week.
Yeah, that
You
would
guys
be
just
good.
have to tell me which date you like. Let me get my room calendar up so I can make sure we've got a room.
Well, this time is good for me, Monday at
Monday's at
1.
1.
So that would be the 15th at 1, are you suggesting?
Yeah.
That looks good for me.
Yep, and that one's clear.
Great, okay.
Does that work for you, Bob?
That works for me.
Okay, perfect. I'll get it on the calendar and we'll get that scheduled.
Great. Okay. I think we're adjourned.
Great.
All right.
Well,
Good timing.
Good timing, all right.
as an aside on trees,
Yes.
I spent yesterday
Here, let me stop everything.
at my daughter's house in Newark, helping to trim trees, weed.